hugsa okkur til þess að setjast niður, hlýða á þriðja og réttan síðustu kynninguna sem hér verður í dag, því svo fyrir við svo í haldbólsumræður aðeins og eftir. Og hún kafar svolítið dýpra, kannski við þurfum alltaf neðar og neðar. Hún kafar svolítið dýpra í heim íslenskra stúdenta og beinir svolítið augunum að hreyfanleika þeirra. Það koma upp á miklu leyti með þessu sömu þemu við höfum heyrt hingað til, en það verður rætt kannski frekar hvernig þau hafa áhrif á sóknnemendana í nám erlendis. Og þetta það sérstaklega áhugavert fyrir okkur sem að þetta verkefni styrkt gegnum Erasmus og við mikinn áhuga á að nemendur nýti sér vel möguleika fyrir náms erlendis. Og kynningin sem hér kemur næst, hún tengt skýrslu sem unnin var Mennta málefni upp úr Eurostudent efniviðnum sem hluti af verkefni sem einnig var styrkt af Evrópsku framkvæmdastjórninni og heitir Bologna Reforms in Iceland og styrkt af Rúnu með Rannís og það er sem Elsa, Maríu, Guðlaugs og Drífudóttur sem kemur hér fram fyrir hönd Landssamtökum íslenskra stúdenta til að kynna skýrsluna. Og hún er með BA-gráðu í myndlist frá Háskólanema og nýkjörinn formaður í Ís, gaman að segja frá því, og tekur við því embætti heldur bara núna síðan í þessum mánuði og þangað til, hún tekur við því, þá er hún alþjóðaforseti í Ís, fólk við enda svolítið í þessum embættisstörfum þarna og hefur þar ennfremur áður gegn stöðu jafnréttisfulltrúa í Ís. Þannig að hefur í raun og veru þá enginn hér jafnmikla innsýn í jafnt aðgengi og alþjóðasamskiptastúdenta eins og hún hefði haldið. Og það er ekki eftir neina bíða, maður bara bjóða hana velkomna hingað í pontu. Það er sækir svo vel.
Já, sæliði, takk fyrir þetta. Eins og Una sagði, þá læri ég í listaháskólanum, ég læri myndlist og ég er einmitt einn af þessum háskólanemum sem við ætlum að tala um núna. Ég fór í skiptinám með Erasmus til Austurríkis og svo fór ég líka í starfsnám til Ítalíu. Þannig að ég hef nýtt mér þau tækifæri sem felast í Erasmus eins og ég gat. Ég er líka mjög glöð að vera hérna fyrir hönd Landssamtökum íslenskra stúdenta. Alþjóðavæðing stendur okkur mjög nærri. Fyrsta stefnan sem við gáum út á 2016 var alþjóðavæðingu í íslensku háskólakerfi. Og við erum mjög glöð að fá þessu upplýsingar vegna þess að komandi árið þarf við að uppfæra okkar stefnu. Og við munum koma til með að nýta okkur þessar upplýsingar, bæði til þess að uppfæra alþjóðastefnuna, líka til þess að uppfæra skrifa nýja jafnréttisstefnu. Og auðvitað, þetta er bara fyrir alla stefnumótun, ekki bara fyrir okkur, en þetta er það sem við ætlum að gera. Við líka tókum þátt í að framkvæma Eurostudent hér á 2016 meðmælstíðum og við hlökkum til þess að taka þátt í því starfi á komandi ári. Þannig að sé á hreinu hvaða hreyfanleika við erum að tala í þessari skýrslu. Þar erum við ekki að tala heila námsbrautir. Við erum að tala skiptinám, við erum að tala starfsnám og tungumálanám. Þannig að þetta er aðeins þrengri völlur heldur en að tala í Eurostudent skýrslunni sjálfri. Af þeim stúdentum sem svöruðu Eurostudent, sem voru 2000 stúdentar eins og farið inn áðan, þá stefna 29% á það að fara utan í sínu námi og 10% hafa þegar einhverja alþjóðlega reynslu úr sínu námi. Ef við berum þetta saman við stúdenta á Norðurlöndunum, þá er það 22% sem stefna á námi erlendis, en 12% sem hafa einhverja alþjóðlega reynslu úr sínu námi. Ég ákvað að skella inn okkar takmarki hjá LÍS. Við viljum að 40% útskrifaðra stúdenta sé með alþjóðlega reynslu úr sínu námi og það leggjum við líka áherslu á það að þeir sem eru innan kennarastéttarinnar, það sé að minnst 60% sem hafa einhverja alþjóðlega reynslu. Ef við tökum þá þætti sem eru langalgengastir í fari stúdenta, sem bæði stefna á og stefna á að fara út, þá fáum við þessa tvo einstaklinga hér. Sá sem stefnir út, hann er yngri 25 ára Hann í bakkalárnámi, hann býr hjá foreldrum sínum. Báðir foreldrar menntaðir og hafa stundanám erlendis og ná engin börn. Þetta sem sagt ekki hinn íslenski stúdent. Og hann ekki ánægður með að búa í Íslandi. Síðan förum við yfir í þá sem hafa í alvörunni farið út og hafa alþjóðlega reynslu úr sínu námi. Þeir þá eldri, þeir 25-29 ára og eiga 2 börn. Þeir búa í stúdingum og alveg eins og sá sem stefnir út þá hafa báðir foreldrar háskólamenntun og hafa stundanám erlendis. Hann óánægður með að búa á Íslandi en það sem líka áhugavert að algengast hvað varðar stúdenta sem hafa alþjóðlega reynslu og hafa farið utan að foreldrar vel staddir fjárhagslega. Þetta fellur ekki undir þá stúdenta sem stefna út en greinilega algengast fyrir þá stúdenta sem hafa farið út. Ef við skoðum það, þá það í rauninni þannig að þeir sem hafa farið út, það 11% sem eiga fjárhagslega vel stadda foreldra en einungis 5% sem hafa fjárhagslega illa stadda foreldra. Við förum til Danmerkur fyrst og fremst. 15% fara til Danmerkur. Næst eftir koma Bretland, Bandaríkin og síðan lækkar þetta smátt og smátt. Þetta yfirleitt alltaf Evrópulönd. Einu löndin sem utan Evrópu Kína, Kanada og Bandaríkin. Til samanburðar þá þetta nefna það að sænskir stúdentar völdu fyrst og fremst Bandaríkin til að fara út og þar voru 18% sem fóru þangað. Þegar við förum í starfsnám eða vinnuskipti þá förum við hins vegar til Bretlands eða til Þýskalands. Það 22% sem fara til Bretlands og það 12% sem fara til Þýskalands en það Danmörk í 10%. Og hún ekki ábyrgsætt þannig. Og þá erum við yfirleitt að fara í starfsnám í 3 mánuði. Það eru ákveðnir þættir í fari stúdenta sem hafa hvað mest áhrif á það hvort það hyggi á að fara út eða hvort þeir hafi farið út. Hluti af því aldurinn. Þeir sem eru líklegastir til þess að ætla sér að fara út yfir 25 ára eins og við sáum áðan því ég sýndi ykkur þessi snið af stúdentunum. Svo lækkar þetta nokkuð þegar maður 25-29 ára og svo stendur það í stað eftir manna 30 ára. Það hægt að setja þetta saman við hvort maður börn. Ef það engin börn þá eru 36% sem stefna á að fara út eða 10% sem hafa eitthvað reynslu að fara utan. Það lækkar strax niður 20% með einu barni og fer niður 15-13% með 2 eða 4 börnum. Þetta mjög áhugavert vegna þess að ef við skoðum þetta og berum það saman við þá staðreynd að við elst og við líklegust til að eiga börn, þá má kannski lesa það sem svo að við að kljást við hvað mestar hindranir þegar kemur að því að öðlast alþjóðlega reynslu. Eða ég les það allavega þannig. Svo þetta hvernig við búum. Þú líklegastur til þess að ætla þér að fara út ef þú býr hjá foreldrum eða fjölskyldu. Svo stendur það nokkuð jafnt ef það stúdentíbúð eða leiguhúsnæði og ef það eigið húsnæði þá lang og líklegastur til þess að ætla þér að fara út. Hins vegar það þið sjáum þetta samt líka að þeir sem eru með reynsluna, það ekki jafn mikið bíl þar og vilja ætla sér að fara út. Þær eru með bara 8-11%. Við eigum nokkuð auðvelt með að fá námi okkar metið þegar við komum allt tilbaka. 66% segja að allt hafi verið metið inn, allar þessi seiningarnar. Ef við berum þetta saman við Norðurlöndin, þá erum við með lægra hlutfall. Það svöruðu 71% því að þeir fengi allar þessi seiningar metnar inn. En hins vegar þá stöndum við betur heldur en Eurostudent held over. Þar svöruðu 60% því að þeir fengi allar þessi seiningar metnar inn. Það hindranir sem standa í vegi fyrir íslensku stúdentum í því að fara utan í nám. Allir stúdentar, hvort heldur sem hann var hér á Íslandi, á Norðurlöndunum eða Eurostudent, sammæltust það að aukin fjárhagsleg byrði helsta hindrunin í því að fara erlendis og sækja sér alþjóðlega reynslu. Næst fylgja aðskilnaður frá vinum, maka, barni, börnum eða fjölskyldu og þar eftir vinnutap eða atvinnumissir. Þetta náttúrulega bara augljóst, auðvitað það fjárhagslega erfitt að fara erlendis og það kannski svolítið áhugavert þetta með vinnutapi og við erum að vinna mest. Það svona getur við kannski velt fyrir okkur nákvæmlega á veginn hvað það varðar. Það líka mjög áhugavert að bera þetta saman við það að stúdentar sem eru með fötlun, fatlaðir stúdentar, þeir nefna aukna á fjárhagslega byrði enn frekar heldur en stúdentar almennt. Það fengur 72% af fjárhagslega byrði væri mikill tálmi. Í samanburði við það sem við sjáum þarna, 37%. Og þar eftir kom hjá fötluðum stúdentum aðskilnaður frá vinum og fjölskyldu, en 16% þeirra sögðu heilsufari að fötlun eða mikill tálmi. Þetta svolítið áhugaverð tafla sem þið sjáið í skýrslunni, þar sem við erum að bera saman í rauninni hvernig stúdentar sem annars vegar stefna út og hafa ekki áhugaðið stefna út, raða upp þeim hindrunum sem til staðar þegar kemur að því að fara út. Auðvitað aukin fjárhagsleg byrði númer 1 hjá báðum hópum, en síðan breytist þetta svolítið, riðlast eftir því hvort að áhugi sé fyrir því að fara út. Sérstaklega fannst mér áhugavert að sjá að takmarka aðgengi alveg mun hærra á lista þeirra sem að stefna á það að fara út heldur en þeirra sem stefna ekki að fara út. Þeir sem stefna nám erlendis setja það í 3. sæti en þeir sem stefna ekki út setja það í 11. sæti. Það örugglega hægt að lesa þetta sem svo ef þú hefur áhuga á því þá ertu búin að skoða hvernig þú ferð að og þá gerur þig grein fyrir því að það skortur á aðgengi. En ef það hefur ekki áhuga á því þá ertu bara örugglega ekki búin að kynna þetta og gerir ekki grein fyrir hvernig aðgengið Svo líka áhugavert, svolítið gefið, skortur á áhuga hvort að stúdentar telji það sem svo að það sé ávinningur í því að fara utan. Ef þú hefur áhuga á því að fara út, þá hlýtur að vera áhugi fyrir því, því hlýtur að vera ofarlega listi hjá þér, en það neðarlega listi hjá þeim sem hafa ekki áhuga að fara út. Og ef þú hefur ekki áhuga að fara út, þá hlýtur að vera að þér finnst ekki vera mikill ávinningur í því að fara út. Ég ekki að segja samt að ef maður ekki með þennan áætlanir þá hafa maður ekki áhuga á því, en það hægt að lesa þetta svoleiðis einhver síður. Báðir hópar samt frekar saman það að skortur á tungumálköntu ekki hindrun. Ég not góð í the English. Og svo náttúrulega í tengingu við kökuna sem ég sýndi áðan þá erfiðleikar við það að fá námið viðurkennt ekki vandamál. Það sett 9. sæti að báðum hópum. Hvernig fjármagnar námið erlendis? Það auðvitað aðspurningin ef að fjármagn aðal tálminn þegar kemur að þessum málum. Aðal fjármögnunarleið íslenskra stúdenta hefðbundin námslán frá LÍN, en margir fjármagna einnig námið með tekjum frá fyrirstörfum eða sparnaði. Og í 3. sæti námsstyrkir frá Evrópusambandinu. Við erum samt ekki að stóla okkur jafn mikið á lánasjóðs- eða stuðningskerfi okkar lands og Norðurlöndin. Þar Norðurlöndin tæplega 50% að styðja sig fyrst og fremst við það stuðningskerfi sem til staðar innan síns lands, meðan við erum einhvers að 34%. En ef við berum okkur saman við Eurostudent þá það 12%, en eins og þið sáðu áðan þá mjög mikill munur á því, sérstaklega landfræðilega, hvernig stúdentar að fjármagna sína alþjóðlegu reynslu. Norðurlöndin reiða sig líka mikið á persónulega tekjur og sparnað. Þar 22% að reiða sig að það, meðan við 26%. Á meðan þau reiða sig eiginlega ekkert á Evrópustyrki, þar þau alveg í 3% sem miklu lægra en bæði Ísland og Eurostudent komplett. Eurostudent fjármagnar sig fyrst og fremst með því að treysta á fjölskyldu eða maka, það er 30%, og jafnt við það þá kemur Evrópustyrkurinn. En þegar kemur að aðalfjármögnunin hafi verið námslán eða stuðningskerfi frá heimalandi, þá er það aðeins í 12%. Það er ekki hægt að treysta bara á eina af þessum leiðum til að fjármagna sína alþjóðlegu reynslu. Þú verður að velja eitthvað svona blöndu af þessu til þess að geta fjármagna. Ég get ekki einungis stólað mig á LÍN, ég get ekki einungis stólað mig á Erasmus-styrkinn, ég verð að nýta þetta einhvern veginn saman. Og þegar kemur að íslensku stúdentum þá erum við fyrst og fremst að nýta okkur þá blöndu sem að felst í eigin tekjum eða sparnaði. Við erum að tala um íslensk námslán og styrkja á vegum Evrópusambandsins. Það er 22,2% sem að gera þetta þannig, en þar næst í 15,6% þá erum við í rauninni sömu samsetningu fyrir utan það að við erum líka með framlög frá foreldrum, fjölskyldu eða maka. Sem er líka áhugavert vegna sem við erum að tala um fjárhagslega viðkvæmt foreldra, fjárhag, stúdentar standa betra vígi eða koma úr sterkum fjárhagslegum bakgrunni heldur stúdentar sem gera það ekki. Það er vandamál.
I'm going to switch to English again, and I think we'll conclude this meeting in English. The panel discussion, you can just stay here. So, I think we've had an interesting afternoon so far. We've got to grips with the generic and overall results of the 6th round of Eurostudent, and I'm sure we could debate all of these topics extensively, but I think we're going to try to be a bit selective. So we've chosen to focus on mobility, and in particular the obstacles to mobility that you were discussing just now, and how we could overcome them or at least mitigate them. And for the panel, we have 4 people on the panel. I'll begin by just welcoming Elsu back again, and another familiar face, Maríu, who's here from Eurostudent. And I'll call 2 new faces to the panel as well. The first is Drífudóttur, who's the head of the International Office of the Icelandic University of the Arts. And that particular university has been very active in promoting mobility for its students. And it's had great success in getting really quite unusual amounts of students to participate in mobility, and to quite great acclaim in the Erasmus community in general. And the second one is Guðlaugs, and she's been working quite a lot on staff and student mobility, I think for just over a decade. She started initially at the International Office at the University of Iceland, and she's seconded to the European Commission, where she worked on Erasmus Plus implementation, and she's now a senior advisor at the Erasmus Plus National Agency here at Rannís, and responsible for all sorts of higher education related issues there. So I need somebody, if somebody, for example, Golda, would like to administer the mic, if we have questions from the audience, then we'll leave one mic there. But I think I'm going to open up by just talking a little bit about hindrances once we get somewhere. Okay. Now, I find it, I don't know, I get a bit depressed looking at some of these results, because I find that we discover that all our students are old, they have children, they're overemployed, they have no time to spend with these children, and they have no time to spend on doing anything other than work. They even say that they would like to do more studying, but they've already spent 50 hours a week doing working and studying. And then we try to get them mobile on top of all of this. So I think we need to sort of move on, think a little bit about what can we actually do to better support, I think, those of our students who have families in particular, to take part in international mobility. I think that would be really a big challenge to us, because it's such a big part of our student cohort. So I will start, I think, with which order. So maybe if we start with that. Have you got some ideas about what people might have done elsewhere?
Yeah, basically what how I concluded my presentation is that national public support, which is portable, is always good to get students to go abroad, because this is the least bureaucratic mean, because they just take what they have at home and go abroad. And this is especially works especially well for the Nordic countries, because the support is so high they can go anywhere basically, taking this with them. But this sounds familiar maybe in this context, but in a lot of other countries, student funding might be restricted to certain fields of study, to certain universities. So I guess here in the north you're on a good way, but I can think of an example from the German Academic Exchange Service. They have a special grant for students with children who want to go abroad. They get a lump sum on top of their Erasmus funding to finance. But I've been an Erasmus student myself as a German. I got 40 euros, I guess, a month. And I just imagine having 240 euros wouldn't be enough for students with children. So besides money, which is always an important issue, it might also help to work on cooperations between universities and the universities' childcare facilities. Because I know that a lot of universities have their own childcare facilities, which are open to their students, but which might not be open to children of international students or students on short-term mobility. And besides money, this might also be that the universities have to make arrangements from be more active in providing housing suited for families, and also childcare and some information, basically information more targeted to the situation of students with children. Most information right now is targeted on young mobile free movers, but this wouldn't help you if you want to move here with your family.
So maybe if I take that on to Alma, now I assume that the students at your particular university are not miraculously younger and more childless than in other universities, and still you've had quite a great deal of success. So what have you been focusing on?
Well, I think if I can just come to what Eva was talking about shortly, that and the picture we have seen painted here today is that we have students that rely heavily on paid jobs, and this is obviously an obstacle when it comes to mobility. And it is a concern also to realize that it's not just an obstacle for students with families, but also for the average 25-year-old student. I think, as Lilia said initially, we need to reconsider the public support that we give to students, the student loans, so that we can create a student lifestyle that is different, and that student can be more mobile and enjoy their studies. One of the interesting feedback we've had from students coming from abroad is actually that many of them mentioned that this was the first time in my study lifetime that I was without a job since I was 14 years old. And that was actually fantastic to get to experience that and simply to enjoy life and to enjoy my studies. So I think we need to consider our society and public support if we want to change anything drastically. When it comes to the high mobility percentage of the Arts Academy, this is also due to the fact that we have been very successful in sending students on traineeships. Actually, 40% of students receiving Erasmus support on an annual basis, these are graduates going for traineeships abroad, which is immensely important for them. to have that opportunity.
So maybe if we move on to Elsu, maybe you want to talk a little bit about students and the voice of students in all of this.
Yes, thank you. I'm maybe going to be mentioning very similar things to the two of you. We need to make sure that there are adequate support measures and resources for especially family students to make sure that they can actually go abroad, and they need to know about it. We need to have transparent information, and we need to deliver that information to the parents so that they actually know that this is in place. I mean, I have a lot of experience with Erasmus+, and I'm still discovering things that are in the Erasmus system, funds that are allocated for specific needs that I just didn't know about. And then I think it's also a matter of, like Eva mentioned, equal access to support services in the country that's receiving you. We need the higher education institutions to partake in that. We also need the government and the municipalities to partake in that. We need to make sure that the students that go out, they have access to support services, to healthcare, and childcare. And this also comes down to accommodation. We haven't really talked about that much, but when you're going abroad, it is tremendously difficult to find accommodation, and you're kind of waiting in blind. You need to know that you have guaranteed housing for you, and especially if you have a family to support. You can't just go there. I mean, when I went on my exchange, I was just staying in an Airbnb for a couple of weeks just to make sure that I had some buffer time to find a place to stay for the remainder of the time. And it should not be like that. People should not be hanging in thin air before they come.
Well, I think maybe, I noticed you were talking about all those hidden Erasmus funds that nobody knows about. And I think if somebody knows about them, it's Luna, isn't it? So maybe perhaps you can enlighten us all about what possibilities and what opportunities we might have and how we could better promote them.
So maybe to take a little step back also, looking at the Eurostudent results, one of the things that we are told here is that our higher education systems are inclusive in the sense that we do have people from different age group with different number of children, they do work or they don't work, and in a sense that's a really, really positive thing. And of course we do want the group of mobile students to be representative of this kind of diversity, and I know that we haven't always been successful in this regard. For people with children, we have a specific challenge, because not only do students in Iceland, 1 out of 3 have children, but also 1 out of 5 of all the students in Iceland have children under the age of 6. So this is, of course, a huge commitment, and it's not easy to move countries if you're in that kind of situation. Of course, funding is crucial. In Iceland, we have been lucky enough to be able to support in the last years everybody who wants to go abroad on Erasmus+. We also have grants that are much higher than the European average, much higher than yours was. I'm very sorry to hear about your low amount. We have the European average is about 1,600 euros per student, while in Iceland a student gets 4,000 euros on average for going abroad. So you can hardly compare. This is important. It's important that people know about it. I think it's also important to keep in mind that international dimension in higher education, it is not only going abroad for a semester or a full academic year, because it's also about the way you have experience your studies at home. Do you have teachers that come from abroad? Are you working on research that has international ties? What about fellow students in campus? Are they from different countries? All of this is internationalization, and it's really important that this benefits the people that for some reason are not able to go abroad. And this is something that Erasmus Plus and similar programs have brought to us, and that's great.
So, is there anyone who would like to ask some questions from the room? Comments? It would be helpful if you could introduce yourself as well, for those of us who don't know you.
I can certainly offer a comment. My name is August Ingolson. I'm head of Education and Culture Division at Rannís, but also responsible for the Erasmus program. The positive comment is that yesterday we got the first news about the funding for the next period for Erasmus, which will be doubled in the next 7-year period. So maybe there's something we can do about the grant levels overall in Europe. But I'm not sure if this is a comment or maybe even a question to you. In our national system, the student loan system, we have graded loans. They take account of your family circumstances. In the Erasmus program, we do not have that. We have special provisions for support to people with special needs. Now, having had 5 children, I don't think that would qualify me as somebody with special needs. But are you suggesting that maybe the program should offer special support for students with children? Because if children are traveling with you, then of course the costs are going to be high. So, this is a suggestion to the Erasmus family that this is what we take up maybe for the next program generation.
Would you like to answer? Alma, you're interested in answering.
But I also have a comment here, a little methodological comment. In the Eurostudent survey, you grouped together, if I noticed correctly, student loans and public support. Having paid for over 20 years my student loans back, I'm still paying them. I'm not sure that that is entirely fair. I think you should make a differentiation between what is essentially a private contribution, even if it's over a long term, and the public contribution. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I had actually written down 2 things concerning obstacles for going abroad. And I think one of them is definitely for families that they would need extra financial support. We have had these questions many times in our office, if there is mobility support for your children, and the answer unfortunately is no. The reason why this is such an important question, however, is what I think comes first is that we have students relying on jobs. Through relying on jobs so heavily, working more than perhaps 25, 30 hours per week, it also means that they are not leaning as heavily on the public support. So they are stuck in a pattern which is really hard to break if you want to go abroad. You can't risk losing your job because eventually you have to come back and ensure that you can go on with the routines that you had before. So I think first of all we need to fix that situation. Also, obviously due to the social and health condition of our students, which seems to be much worse than the average European student. So I think we are stuck in a cycle that we need to break.
Maríu, would you like to comment on the loans and the public support?
Yeah, that's something we have in mind for the next questionnaire, because it's actually it's from my point of view I agree with you. It's a great difference if you have a loan or a grant. But I wanted to say something for the Erasmus funds. I think listening to you, I get the idea that providing lump sums per person is the right way to go, because the way I experienced it is at least that's the way they do it in other European countries, is that they grant it to the university and then down to the department. And if you are a student at a very mobile department, you end up with, pocket money. And this is so you kind of the amount you get is dependent on how many other students in your cohort in your department are mobile, which may lead to deterring effects that a very mobile department is stuck then because too many people want to go. And also lump sums would, coming back to this DAAD lump sum fund, would make it easier for families to calculate, because then you know, okay, I get this for myself, I get this for my children, and maybe you have another for your partner, and then you can calculate. Because most of the time you don't know what you get until you're there. I mean, at least that's from my experience, and that's I can't imagine a family going abroad if they don't know what means they would have to live on if they're abroad. So I guess that's the way. The Icelandic way is you're already like in the top of the
It's good to know that we're doing something right, please. And I think the system you described where actually students in departments are being punished for having many mobile students in the department is not particularly one we would like to encourage. So I trust you take information about our wonderful lump sum system back to Germany and tell them it's much better. And we shouldn't punish mobile departments. Now, do we have any other comments from the room? Helga.
Hi, my name is Helga Lind, and I used to be a part of LIS, not anymore actually. My question is to Eva Maria, and it's based on kind of what I'm missing from this survey, because I feel it's quite excluding. I'm wondering, why are we not collecting data on migrant students or students with migrant backgrounds? LGBTQ plus issues. The survey is also really gender binary. Is this something that you're planning on changing in the next version? Because in Europe, I think that the biggest challenge that we're facing now is that we need to get migrant students into universities, and then we also need to see, are they accessible? Is it possible for them, or is it not? So I'm basically wondering, are you planning on including that?
I mean, we have a lot of data on migrants and migration background this round. I just didn't focus on it in this presentation. But I think the problem you address goes even further from Central European point of view. We don't, in some systems, we don't even manage to integrate students whose parents were migrants, so second generation migrants. So you can, if you look in the report, you can see it's even difficult to integrate them into the higher education system or open it up for them. And well, talking about newly arrived migrants, this might be even harder. But why we focus so much on higher education background instead of migration background is this is really more decisive. If you are a migrant yourself or your parents, it's still the more decisive issues if do you have an academic background in your family or not, because this is the most determining factor for taking up higher education studies. And about the other issues, it is binary because we don't have microdata right now. We do ask in the questionnaire, are you female, male, or you don't, then we ask for the gender you registered at your higher education institution. But until now it's very binary, and we have to kind of throw out all the who don't want to say they're male or female. I hope we can heal this if we have more microdata, and then we can have 3 groups and cross-tabulate a lot of things. This is kind of dealing with 28 countries and don't having access to individual data makes it hard to investigate more groups.
I think we should clarify that when the data gets sent to your student, it is sent in ratios and etc. It's not sent, the actual microdata is not sent, and so it is difficult, at least at present, to get these sort of information out. But it's something that is part of further developments for Euro students. We might get with some promising signs, we might get some better data even than we have at the moment.
Just so we get the data, we might have 5% of students who do not identify themselves as male or female, but then we can't say we just have this percentage. We can't say, oh, they're 25 years old or they're older or younger, because we only have these percentages. So it makes it hard to include more groups.
I mean, I would like to take up something you mentioned, because we didn't discuss it very much here, but one of the strongest influences in these data is the higher education status of your parents. And in this country, of course, we know we've been trying to get our education status up. We've now got a comparable number of people with, who are participating in higher education, but it still leaves them with the parents having themselves been young at a time when higher education attainment was not so high. And I think it would be very useful for us to go back and to discuss a little bit more about this. And I wonder how we might be able to overcome this difficulty, because it goes through all the data, everything you look at. If you want to be mobile, you're going to be mobile if your parents are better educated, etc. Your income is better, etc. Your outcome is better, everything's better. So I wonder if we can spend a little bit of time talking about this, in particular talking about solutions. What can we do to try to get around this problem, I think? So maybe if I can start with Elsa, maybe you might have some ideas.
Thank you. Yes, I think the most immediate solution when it comes to lower socio-economic backgrounds would be specifically allocated funds for these students. Talking about specific funds for families. If you are from a lower socioeconomic background, you also need more funding. That's just that. We also, when it comes to access in higher education and representation in higher education, it is a long-term mission. It's a long-term goal. And to be able to actually fight for increased representation, we need policy making. We need a national access plan, which would break down the barriers to higher education. We need to make sure that we're working from the bottom up. We're not just trying to catch students as soon as they're at the right age to enter higher education.
What about the institutions? Do you think you could do something about overcoming this difficulty?
Yeah, well, actually a student who doesn't have an example of someone going abroad for studies in their family, parent or a sibling, obviously is lacking some encouragement for that, possibly. Not having any great stories of inspiration of how great it was to be a student abroad. So I think as institutions, we have to make it very explicit that studying abroad is for everyone, and that Erasmus is a very good option, as it is a kind of a safe haven, because it is planned by your university and you can try out perhaps for the first time to go studying abroad, gain your credits and not to be delayed in your studies. So it is a very good opportunity in that sense. As institutions, I think it's really important that we manage to embed the mobility program within study programs, and that we have the different units of our universities working together towards preparing students for mobility. So it's not just the responsibility of the international office, but it's the international office unit working closely together with student counseling, study department, student affairs, and that everybody inside the institution is ensuring that the student is receiving the support that he needs.
Would you like to comment on this issue?
So this link with background of parents, I think this is something that maybe we have underestimated in Iceland, at least to me personally. These results from Eurostudent, they came as a bit of a shock. And let's not forget that the most disadvantaged young people in Iceland, they never reach the level of higher education. So we don't even have them in our Eurostudent results. And I think that's something that's really important to keep in mind. We said it before, funding is crucial. It's really important, especially for this group, to secure grants if they were to go abroad that are high enough to sustain them while they're there. And here I need to clarify something that was said earlier, because actually in 2014 with Erasmus+, grants were streamlined throughout Europe, so you should be able to expect more or less the same level of grant whether you come from Spain or Poland or whatever, then the grant is calculated from the way where you're going to, the living cost there. Iceland is an exception because we are classified as an outermost regions, so our grants are higher because the cost of travel is more. But the program actually foresees grant for disadvantaged students. And then it's up to the national authorities in each country to define how do we decide who's disadvantaged and who does not. In Finland, for example, they have made the decision to classify people with children as disadvantaged. And then they can top up their grant and make it higher if they belong to that classification. In Iceland, because we do have much higher grants anyway, we don't have this flexible system, but it means that everybody gets the higher grant instead. We will have a new program in 2020. Maybe we can foresee some kind of mechanism to especially support those that really, really need it in Iceland also. So that's something definitely to keep in mind.
So, anybody in the room has some ideas about how we might overcome this? Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Sten Olav. I'm from Norway. I'm a student there. It's not directly onto this, but I would like to follow up on the housing and accommodation issues that Elsu was mentioning before, and here in Iceland. Because we saw before that 28% of students here in Iceland live with their parents. In the Nordic countries, only 8% live with their parents. But at the same time, students in Iceland are way more dependent on their family to actually finance their studies. So Icelandic students live at home and they are financially dependent on their family. So I wonder if the panel could give some thoughts on how Iceland can change your support system, your loan system, and your housing policy to actually improve this situation and get closer to the Nordic countries, which often are mentioned as good examples.
Do we have any other questions before we get to this, the difficult, thorny issue of the cost of Icelandic housing, which is a rather depressing one. So, anybody else want to make a comment before we go to the panel? No, everybody wants to know how to solve the Icelandic housing crisis. So, now, where do we start? Maybe, Eva, would you like to get a little bit about it? Not having to pay rent here.
I just remember an example I heard last year when we had a researchers conference in Vilnius. There was a researcher from Ireland who said they invest a lot in student accommodation because they have the same finding in Ireland as we he was the first to poke me to this pattern that students who are not well off most often live away from their parents. So they kind of try to design student accommodation to address this group of students. Because he says there are also those who have more danger of drinking problems and isolation, and because they're not used to this new situations. So I don't know if student accommodation or provide more student accommodation could solve the problems in Iceland, but it's very different from country to country how large a share of students live in accommodations and how they are financed. I mean, if they're privately financed and relatively costly, then they wouldn't make sense. But in Germany, student housing is publicly funded, but there's not so much of it available. So maybe something in between.
Yes, I think this is a pattern that our own students are quite familiar with. So would you want to comment on the availability of student housing?
Yes. We need more student housing, that's a fact. We also need our loan system to actually give us the money we need to be actually able to live in student housing. The loan system right now only gives us the amount, if we're living away from our parents, you get the amount that barely covers the cost of student accommodation in the University of Iceland. It does not cover if you're staying in a different apartment, if you're staying in an accommodation that's not for students. Of course, we just have a lack of housing in general. We need more housing. We need more housing for students. We need a better loan fund. I hope that we will see that sooner rather than later, and that it will actually cover the needs of students that live away from their parents. Because, I mean, it's very obvious. Students don't want to live with their parents. They don't want to be financially dependent on their parents, especially since, I mean, Icelandic students are old. They have their own children. These numbers don't make any sense. So more funding, more housing, and also, I really like what you said earlier, Alma, about this kind of stereotype when it comes to students. I think people, like, there's this very prominent mindset that students should just barely get by. While you're a student, you shouldn't be prospering. You should just be getting by until you get out of there. And this is a very, very difficult mindset, and it makes it very difficult to be a student because you feel like a burden on society rather than an investment.
We can hear heckling from the student comments at the back. Now, what about the institutions, Emma? What do you think? What have you been doing at your institution to try to?
Well, we don't offer any student
No, I
housing
don't.
there, so unfortunately. But I think, I mean, we need to address this to our authorities and kind of consider what kind of society we want to have here. So I think we should bring this question back to Lydia. I think this cycle I was describing of the student working more than 25 hours a week so that he can get by as a student and pay for his housing. That student probably also needs to have a car because he needs to go back between university and his job really quickly. So I think, you know, the two keys to finding a solution to this is to offer student housing to students. That it's not something unique and that you are a really special person to have actually have had access to such a solution. And then secondly, we should enhance the transport system.
Yeah. All for enhancing the transport system, I think that we're getting nearer to the end of our time, but there's one thing I thought about as I was listening to the presentation, and it has to do with reaching out to certain groups of students. And I noted that, although it was in Icelandic, Lise said that part of their international strategy is that you should get more mobile students in the teaching professions. And I should say that actually in Bologna, this was also part of the Year-Round Declaration, that you should try to increase the mobility of teaching students. Now, at least in Iceland, the problem has laid in the inflexibility of the curriculum for students studying education. And because we're now reviewing our educational curriculum for education students, I think it would be useful to get some insights into what could be done, and in particular, perhaps from the people in the room, what could be done to try to get our teaching students more mobile. So I'm going to start, I think, with Eva to see if she knows of any examples of where this has been done, and then I'll move on to Elsa to explain a little bit about the thinking behind the strategy, and then we'll move to the people in the audience before we finish up.
Thanks. I actually can just support what you said. It's this is also a very general pattern across the world, that if you ask students of education and teacher training why they don't go abroad, they say, well, because my curriculum is not flexible, I don't get the credits recognized, there's no plus for it for my studies. So a lot of countries, especially Germany, they're working very hard right now to target this group, to especially target this group, and all of them came to the same conclusion: we need to flexibilize the curriculum, well, you have to have them mobile, because if they just lose their places, their designated school places, as is in some Eastern European countries, that you already know where you go when you and you lose that if you go abroad. But another thing that I found out is I would also be careful to demand too much mobility of students of education and teacher training, because these are exactly the students where there are a larger share of students without higher education background. They work more than the average student, they have more children, or they have children compared to the students who do not have children. So this is kind of a field of study where the higher education institutions open up to new groups, to first generation students, and I guess we should be very cautious not to kind of close that door again by enforcing mobility requirements that they can't or don't want to fulfill.
Elsu.
Thank you. When we were writing that policy paper on internationalization of higher education, we specifically talk about the special position of Iceland in an international geographical sense. I mean, we have the World Wide Web, but real life experiences are not to be constituted by that. We specifically emphasize that we want 60% of our teachers to have some kind of international experience. This is based on that, and this is also based on actually we need people to realize that internationalization is something that we actually gain from. That we as a whole, the Icelandic society, the higher education institutions, the individuals, the curricula, it all gains from internationalization. That way, like this is how we actually get free flow of knowledge. This is how we learn, essentially. And if our teachers do not have the international experience, we are actually lacking a very significant role model when it comes to internationalization, because your teacher is the one you're looking at when you're learning, and if your teacher doesn't have international experience, why would you feel like you need it? And I actually think, I understand this with students that don't come from a higher education background, maybe being fended off or something by being required to go abroad. But if we actually do the things that we were talking about, like allocated funding, transparent procedures, delivering the information that internationalization is a possibility for all, this should not be a problem.
I think we can all agree with that.
That should come first.
So I wonder if anybody has got any ideas, or that was here, how to tackle this problem. I mean, I can see at least one rector who has a teaching program. Rita, would you like to comment on this at all?
No, basically I think you've covered a lot of ground when it comes to what we can do and what we can't do.
Yeah.
But this is certainly very thought-provoking for us.
Mm. I think it should be.
Hi.
And
I think we should, basically what we need to do is to bring this mentality down to the play schools and work from that onwards. Mm-hmm. It needs to be part of, we need to integrate this mentality and this mindset, like you were explaining, into the population from a very early age on. And that will, in the end, hopefully bring us more privileged people, or people that can enjoy the privileges of actually being part of an international community as well as the local community. And I think I was particularly, I'm going to use the opportunity here to impressed by your comments on migrant students, which I think is something that we haven't thought about much in Iceland, but really need to do, because we don't need to sort of create a more sectioned society in terms of class structure than we already have, and we should work with the options that we have in order to prevent problems that other nations have had to face and we have not had to face yet. So I think this is also part of the internationalization of our educational system, to take into account people that have moved to Iceland and have other experiences, other backgrounds, different backgrounds, and have a lot to bring, not only for us to fetch abroad, but things that we can actually fetch within the community itself.
May I add something?
Yes, please.
The youth student results also show that students with migration background, even themselves or who have parents who have migrated, they show higher mobility rates. So this is kind of, if you get, this is like, we want to raise mobility rates, and so this is like a win-win situation, because they will be also more likely to go abroad once they've made it into higher education.
I think that's actually a very good way to end this particular panel. And I think I want to thank you all for being very attentive, and some of you for being participatory. And I think there was a lot of discussion also going on during the coffee break, and maybe some of you want to continue those discussions now, because sometimes it's a lot easier to ask questions face to face than to a panel standing up by a couple of tables. I think, to me, the fact that parental attainment, the fact that migration background is so important is something that we just cannot ignore. And I think we know that, in particular, that mobility increases our chances later in life, in the workplace. So we need to try to work out how we best even out the inequalities in our system for our students and their access to mobility. And I think we can all take that back to our workplaces, to our classrooms and offices and institutions and governmental agencies and ministries, and keep it in mind when we come to making policy. And the data are there, so we just need to make sure that we use them. And I think, finally, before I invite all of you for a celebratory drink, I think we're going to end the day on that because it's Friday. I want to give a little quick plug here to another conference that's happening in 11 days' time, where I would hope to see all of you and bring your friends. So it's about integrating research into the learning experiences of our students. So I hope you take note, and that I will see all of you there. And I also wanted to just thank the people who've been instrumental in getting this, both the Eurostudent project and this conference going. So Maskina, of course, Rannís, and in particular Runa and Laura, who helped out an awful lot today and in the days leading up to this. I think I want to thank somebody who left with the minister, my colleague Ausgeda, who also was very, very influential in working with Eurostudents. And then I think last we should thank the 2,000 students who actually sat down and completed what was really a rather long and tedious questionnaire. And I hope that
the German one, it was rather swift.
But I hope that, because we can see the data being used, and if we can actually promote the data being used and tell people when we're using it, then we might get even more students wanting to participate next time. So keep your eyes peeled for when the next questionnaire comes out, and talk to all your friends about it as well. Thank you.
Ja.